Energy cannot be created nor destroyed. It can only be changed from one form to another. Albert Einstein. Karma is a cosmic law in Sanatan, or Hinduism, Buddhism, and Jainism primarily, that is based on the law of cause and effect. The word karma comes from the Sanskrit root karman, which means action. This is why the term karma can suitably be translated as action and consequence. Understanding this, karma does not indicate what is right or wrong. It is not a law based on morality. The Buddha taught that there are only three qualities that the universe has that are eternal. They are karma, which is what perpetuates the wheel of samsara. Then there is nirvana, the cessation of karma. And lastly, space, the emptiness, the infinite. Karma is simply the law in nature that manages energy, so it can also be referred to as the law of exchange. Everything that exists in the universe requires energy to sustain itself. That's why the great inventor and physicist Nikola Tesla said, "If you wish to understand the secrets of the universe, think in terms of energy, frequency, and vibration." That is, of course, the reason why we are able to live and sustain ourselves, because we regularly take in the energy we need to survive, primarily food and water. But even the most effortless, small, or subtle functions we carry out on a daily basis, like thinking or imagining or feeling things emotionally, expend energy when we engage in them. For this reason, every thought and action, regardless of how insignificant it may seem, is an exchange of energy. And all energy exchanges produce consequence. There is no exception to this. In fact, because of something called quantum entanglement theory, which began in the modern era, we now have a way of understanding and explaining how all thoughts, actions, events, and things are recorded in the universe and can be found within the quantum field matrix and traced back to its origin, near the Big Bang and beyond. In Hinduism, this field matrix or library of information is known as the Akash. Many people call it the Akashic records. Everything that exists leaves an energetic imprint whose chain of causality and dependent origination can be browsed and traced. The quantum field theory, among many things, can scientifically demonstrate to us the existence of the Hindu Akash. Wrong action produces unwanted karma, which results in all the negative consequences and inconveniences we receive in life. In the context of karma, the word dharma is sometimes used to refer to good karma. This is experienced as all the beneficial results and inconveniences we receive when we perform good deeds. There are four primary types of karma. One kind is a primordial type of karma that originates from the type of experience and lessons that the monad decides for the soul to have before the soul enters into evolution. The next kind of karma is fate karma, or past life karma. This kind of karma is based on the quality of mind that the soul has accumulated from all their previous lives, including their present life, and it determines the quality and conditions for the next incarnation. A soul with fate karma can live a sedentary life and not produce any significant daily karma, and yet carry great debts from previous lives that must inevitably be paid. Daily karma is the karma that we accrue from actions that we take on a daily basis. The actions of this nature are generally not consistent or repetitive enough over the long term to create a significant increase in the ego, and thus, most daily karma can be paid within days, weeks, or months. Lastly, there is the law of accidents. This is the possibility that significant events and accidents can occur on occasion without substantial causality, merely because of the diverse interplay and interactions of beings in an environment. When you live in a big city, for example, a lot of problems can happen at any moment. You could be walking down the street and struck by a car or a bus. You can get lost easily. You can lose your transit ticket. You can find yourself in rush hour and late for work. And so many of these events, inconveniences, and things can happen that don't have any strong causality behind them and are just happening because of our carelessness or somebody else's carelessness, or because of the high probability of things to go wrong in a complicated environment. Karma has a mechanical aspect to it, which can be found in physics, but we should never limit our understanding of karma to a strict, inflexible, mechanical law, because karma is actually an intelligent, conscious law that is managed by very elevated beings, Buddhas. As such, karma is a flexible and negotiable law, with the exception of actions related to sex being non-negotiable. Karma caused by sex can be paid in different ways, but cannot be voided entirely. Since karma is a conscious law, superior laws always override inferior laws. I was in a dream, and at one point, I began to receive an insight from my intuition. My Divine Mother narrated to me, "Evil always has the last say," as I began to see these dark entities materialize near me so that they could carry out a negotiation with the superior beings that were already here in the place that I was dreaming at. When I woke up from that vision, I thought about why it is the case that evil has the last say in karmic judgments. And if you think about it, any creature that has ego carries their own subjective, unreliable, and false way of perceiving the world. So it makes perfect sense that souls with ego, or souls who are devoid of a conscience, should never take priority over judging with the law, because karma is a perfect and conscious law, and beings with ego are not perfect. Actions of any kind cannot be taken back or ignored, but superior actions can pay for outstanding karma so that the consequences become reduced or erased. The lords of karma take into consideration many things when it comes to judging souls according to the law. A person can be rewarded sometimes for simply putting effort into a task or deed, but their results are multiplied when their deed makes an outward impact on the lives of other beings. So if you write a self-help book, but it never gets published, your book will have very little karmic impact. Intention and level of cognizance is another thing the lords of karma consider. Many of us have heard the line in the Bible where Jesus says, "Forgive them, Father, for they know not what they do." This is something that happens during karmic judgments. The severity of karma from a thought or action can vary slightly depending on whether the person had bad intentions or good ones. The severity of karma will vary even more depending on whether the person did something in a habitual and mechanical way, in other words, in a state of psychological sleep, or in a deliberate and cognizant way, like in the case of a magician with awakened consciousness, or a bank robber who needs to stay sharp and alert and fully aware of what he is doing. Another thing to be aware of is the level or dimension in which we perform an action. We live here in the physical world and body, which is our primary domain for now. And most of us are completely accustomed to physicality. So for us, generally speaking, actions that are taken in the physical world have the most effect and consequence than those taken in more subtle dimensions, like the astral plane, which is where we engage in when we think, feel, and imagine. Regarding the negotiability of karma and its relationship with fate or destiny, this is what Master Samael had once explained. Karma is the law of compensation, not of vengeance. There are some who confuse this law with detriment and even fatalism, believing that everything that happens to the human being in life is inexorably determined beforehand. It is true that the acts of the human being are determined by inheritance, education, and the environment. It is also true that the human being has free will and can modify his actions to educate his character, to form superior habits, to fight against weaknesses, to fortify virtues, etc. Invariance is another characteristic of karma that expresses itself in Newton's third law of physics, action and reaction. Newton's third law states that for every action or force in nature, there is an equal but opposite reaction. If object A exerts a force on object B also exerts an equal but opposite force on object A. The most simple examples of invariance include dropping a ball onto the ground and watching it bounce up and down until it reaches a state of equilibrium. Another simple example is the recoil of a firearm, such as a rifle. We also witness invariance when we drop a pebble into a body of water and create waves that move up and down. But a more elaborate and interesting phenomenon of karma is the law that demonstrates that the consequence of an action is always greater than the initial action. Just one push of a domino from the beginning of the line can make the entire lineup fall down. Or let us take the pebble in the water example again. When we throw a rock or pebble into a still body of water, we see the initial plunge of the rock into the water, we see the water dip down where the pebble landed, and then we see the water splash up again and continue to create waves that propagate outward. This cycle of invariance between waves continues to repeat until the energy in the water subsides. Furthermore, the waves can also create ripples that span across the entire pond or lake. And in spite of those ripples being weaker than the initial waves, they can still affect a very broad area within which the surrounding animals can sense. Just like all mechanisms and processes in nature, reincarnation, or more specifically, return or recurrence, is a byproduct of karma. When we die, our soul goes through the process of death and rebirth, and the circumstances of our next life are determined by the karma we accrued in this life as well as previous lives. The necessity to return is due to unresolved karma, which has collected in the mind as energy that is still in motion. This is our subconsciousness, and it contains conditions and causes that are still at play. This is the part of our mind that belongs to the wheel of samsara. But going back to the law of invariance in karma, if we remember that for every action or force in nature, there is an equal but opposite reaction, then the same rule applies to reincarnation. And this is why typically, when we reincarnate or return, the roles and circumstances between soulmates invert or switch. Typical relationship dynamics such as boyfriend and girlfriend, or parent and child, or uncle and nephew, take turns alternating in each life. Sometimes the roles remain similar, but just have slight variations, such as someone who was once a business mentor, but is now the uncle. Another law of physics that karma expresses itself through is Newton's second law of thermodynamics, which explains the universal experience of heat and energy interconversions. This law states that heat always moves away from warm objects and toward colder objects. So in order to reverse the direction of heat flow, you must exert more energy to do so. That's why there is also a law in physics called entropy. Entropy is nature's tendency to behave disorderly and randomly in various systems and natural elements. This phenomenon is commonly explained by comparing states of matter, such as solids, liquid, and gas. In the case of states of matter, the formation of water molecules into ice, for example, requires more energy output and order than the formation of liquid or gas. A simple way of putting it is that it's easier for any object or creature to move downhill than it is to move uphill. The reason this is important for us is because evolution works in the same way. The way we use energy on a regular basis determines the quality of our life in the future. Are we just using up whatever energy we have every day and spending it on useless activities? Or are we living efficiently and constantly looking to gather and conserve energy so that we can put all of our effort into helping others?
And so trauma, as I mentioned before, is just a really powerful experience of gnosis that prevents us from denying suffering. But other experiences, good experiences, can have that same kind of untransformed or undigested impressions, that same effect on our structure of our psyche. And even though the physical body doesn't carry on from lifetime to lifetime, what we call the astral body, which is made up of our emotions, or the mental body, which is made up of, more finer mental substances, carry on from lifetime to lifetime in the form of the ego.
So that's why I say it's a type of knowledge or gnosis that cannot be denied, no matter how much our rational mind tries to deny it and say, this didn't happen to me, this wasn't a big deal, this shouldn't have affected me this much. It really is a chance for us to wake up. So in many ways, trauma can be a wake-up call, a chance for us to say, there is something in life, in my life, that is fundamentally wrong. This suffering needs to be changed. It can be a chance for us to explore, to seek more answers, to try to find a way to change. And for many people, they seek more existential roots to solve their problems. They seek to find a spiritual answer for why people have to suffer. Some horrible things, such as rape, sexual assault, child abuse, even things like divorce, or things that can be so painful emotionally, physically, etc. And so, on one hand, trauma presents us with an opportunity to radically change our lives. But for many people, it's very difficult to find answers or things that really work to make a change in their life, to really address their suffering. And in those cases, trauma often becomes more of a burden or an obstacle, something that only pushes us deeper into suffering, where perhaps a parent's problems with addiction when we were a child now cause us to struggle with addiction, as an example. Karma provides us with the opportunity to see ourselves in a new way, to wake up to our suffering and to change. What did I do to produce this? Maybe not in this lifetime, but in previous lifetimes. And what can I do to change it if I awaken consciousness and respond in a new way? But it also comes with the risk of just getting more identified with that intense pain and going deeper and deeper into suffering and continuing the downward spiral. And he concludes with quite a bit of severity. Disgracefully, instead of bowing with reverence before the eternal living God within each one of us. People protest, blaspheme, they justify themselves, they stubbornly excuse themselves and wash their hands like Pilate. Karma is not modified with such protests. On the contrary, it becomes harder and more severe. No matter how much we might resist karma or be mad about our situation or say, well, I was a good person and I didn't deserve this and why is this happening? And yell at our inner God, it won't change cause and effect. It's not going to change the energies in nature that are coming to manifest for us. We will reap what we sow. If we do good deeds that produce harmony in our environment, that produce happiness in other people, they will respond to us with that happiness. So attachment theory, for those who are unfamiliar, is that if we have stable attachment, a healthy, safe environment in which we grow up, we experience relationships in a different way and are much more easily able to have healthy relationships later on in life. If we have an unhealthy or unstable, dysfunctional family or environment as a child, it changes the way our brain is wired, and we have much more anxiety and fear and withdrawal in relationships later in life. So you're saying, those formative years, not just for attachment, but for all kinds of things in our personality, have a tremendous effect on us, and science has shown this. How much of those formative years is causing the problems we have now in life versus past lives? And yes, you kind of answered your question. The formative years are the compressed aggregate of many previous lifetimes. So the formative years is where we see not just lifetimes, like, okay, my past 10 lifetimes, but very ancient lifetimes, things that go back, to previous civilizations. And so things that happened, not just as an individual, but as people, as a collective, are encoded into even the way that a fetus forms. If you've ever looked at a human fetus, it goes through phases of evolution, almost looking like a lizard at certain points and then becoming more human. All of our biology, our DNA, our physical existence is a code based on our spiritual existence. It is the physical manifestation of the internal existence. So when we see early childhood traumas and pain like that, it's often from an ancient past of being caught in a cycle with that person's family, with those other souls or individuals that are in that family of, harming one another. It's very sad.